Okay, let's talk about working with group policies. I want to back up and talk about organizational units for just a second, and then we'll see how this relates to group policies. So I'm going to open up Tools, Active Directory Users and Computers. And here I have my Active Directory. I have folders and I have organizational units. Now, folders are predefined. I don't make folders. I can make new organizational units. And you can tell there's a little difference in the icon. Users is a folder. Let me click up here. Sales is an organizational unit. So you can see a little bit of a difference there. Both folders and organizational units can hold users, groups, computers, etc. In fact, most computers, by the way, if you join the computer to the domain from the computer itself, it will most likely go into the computers folder. Unless you have pre-staged a computer account for it in an organizational unit, it will go to the computers folder. Now that's going to be important because we can put computers, or we can put organizational units, we can link them to, let me try that again. We can link group policies, there we go, to organizational units. We cannot link them to folders. Now, the other thing we need to know is that you can nest organizational units. So you can put an organizational unit inside of an organizational unit, inside of an organizational unit, as many layers deep as you want. Okay, so quick refresher on organizational units. Let's go to our group policy management console here. And here, we're going to look at our group policies. Now we have when you open this up, the first time it'll be collapsed. You can expand the forest and then the domain and then, or domains group and then domains. And here you'll see your organizational units. You will also see right here, this is a linked group policy. This is not an actual group policy. The group policy actually lives here. So the default domain policy here is linked here. And you can tell the difference in the icon. And the reason that's important is because that tells us where these are linked. In fact, if I expand my default domain controllers policy, we'll see that there as well. And in a previous video, we've already looked at these a little bit. So the links are what applies to them. You can create a group policy, but if you don't link it, it actually does, well, pretty much absolutely nothing. So when we create a group policy, we set the policies that we want to be applied. And you can create multiple group policies. A single group policy can be applied to multiple OUs. A single OU can have multiple group policies applied. If you have things nested, like right here, we have the domain, and then nested under that is the group policies. So any policies that apply to the domain will apply to all the organizational units underneath it. If I had another organizational unit underneath sales and I applied a policy to sales, it would also apply to any organizational units underneath it and all the objects within those organizational units. Let's create a group policy, and when we do that, we'll talk a little bit about how these are managed. So I'm going to right click on policy objects and I'm going to click on new. Now I can also click on a location where I want it to link. So let's say sales, and I can create a GPO in this domain and link it here. That gives it to me in one step. I'm going to go ahead and create it here though. So I'm going to create a new group policy, and we're going to use this policy. We're going to call this the user restrictions policy. And I'm going to click OK. All right, now that gives me a policy right here. It's not linked anywhere, so it's not taking any effect. Of course, I have no settings in it. So let me double click on the policy and let's see what we can do with it. So the links right here, this is going to display every place that it's linked. And then where it's linked, it can be enforced, the link can be enabled, and then it'll give it the path. The link enabled means, are we actually using this or not? Enforced is kind of an override. So if you have two policies that are in conflict with each other, the latest one applied wins. If you enforce it, it overrides that. So if I enforce something at the domain, if I enforce a policy that here at sales, I have another policy that says the opposite, I enforce this one, it will override this one. We don't want to do that very often if we don't have to. The less complex we can make this, and you can get super complex with group policies, the less complex we make it, the better. So the better approach would be to, if we could, and this is not always possible, which is why Microsoft gives us the opportunity to enforce, but a better approach, if possible, would be to choose not to enforce, but to not overwrite that policy later on. It's just going to be cleaner. Now, the other thing we have here is security filtering. And so this lets us filter by group. So by default, this applies to all authenticated users. So wherever I put this, it will apply to all authenticated users there. My details gives me very little detail about it. It does let me enable the group policy, disable all settings, or enable either user configuration or computer configuration. We'll talk about that in a minute. Enabled means everything is enabled. Settings, this shows us the policies that are set, delegation, who can control this, and status. Okay, I want to actually make some settings in this group policy now. So I'm going to right-click on user restrictions. I'm going to go to edit, and that's going to bring up another window. This is my group policy management editor. Now you can see this is divided into two high-level areas. So user configuration and computer configuration. Computer configuration is applied to computers. Now remember, we looked earlier and we saw that computers are going to go into the computers folder, and I cannot apply a group policy to that folder. So what I have to do then is move my computers out of that folder, either by moving them after I have a computer account created or by pre-staging a computer account. I need to put them in an OU where then I can attach a group policy. And then all of these settings will become active on those policy or on those computers that are in that organizational unit. User configuration, same thing, it applies to users. Computer configuration takes effect when a computer boots up. User configuration takes effect when a user logs in. Now, user configurations apply to users, not computers. Computer configuration applies to computers, regardless of which user sits there. Okay, so we do have something, or let me back up. We have some policies that will show up in both computer configuration or user configuration, for example, printer assignment. The question is just, where do you want that to be assigned? Do you want it to be assigned to the computer regardless of who sits there, or to the user regardless of where they sit and what computer they logged into? And then you got to make sure you apply it to the OU that has the appropriate type of objects in it. Okay, then we also have these broken down by policy and by preference. Now, a policy is something that will be enforced. This must be this way. A preference sets a preference, but then after the user logs in, they can override that preference if they want. And you'll notice we have policies and preferences here in both. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of things here. I'm going to start by going to user configuration, policies, administrative templates. And this gives me a bunch of administrative templates. I can also expand them over here. I'm going to go to System, and this will give me, it's basically a folder structure that lets me go through a bunch of different settings. Now, I'm just going to tell you, I know where I'm going, but in general, there are hundreds of settings here in group policies. So if you know what you want to do and you think you can do it through group policy, you really don't want to meander around in here and try to find it. It's going to be far easier if you Google search it and go find it that way. How do I do X using group policies? And then you will normally find an article that will tell you the exact path to the setting. And that's going to make your life much easier rather than trying to fumble around in here for a while. So here's what I want to do. I want to restrict my users from using removable storage devices. So like USB devices or something like that. So it's user configuration, policies, administrative templates, system, and right here, removable storage. And this gives me a bunch of different settings. So I want to do this. I want to find my setting that's going to be that's going to give me what I want. All removable storage classes. That's going to be everything, whether it's CD, DVD, floppy drive, removable disk, tape drive, whatever. I want to block all of it. So all removable storage classes deny access. And this is not configured. Now, a policy can be enabled, disabled, or not configured. Not configured means, we don't care. If another policy somewhere sets it, that's fine. We're not going to worry about that. I'm going to go ahead and double click on this. So here's my options: not configured, enabled, or disabled. So enabled says, yes, enforce this policy. I care, do it. Disabled means, yes, I care, don't do it. Disable this policy. And so we would use that, like say we wanted to override. So let's say I wanted to deny removable storage access to everybody in my network, except people in my sales department. Well, what I could do then is I could create a policy that said, enable this, block access. I could link it in my domain, and then that's going to apply to everybody in my domain. Then I create another one that says, disable this. So no, turn this off, and I can link that at my sales OU. And because my sales OU is more specific, then that one will trump. So policies are applied to the local computer first, so the local computer policy, not group policies. And then the domain, and then the organizational unit, and then smaller and smaller nested OUs all the way down. And the latest one applied wins. So I'm going to go ahead and apply this setting. Notice, by the way, I can put a comment here. This will also tell me a little bit about it. If I have any other options, they would be over here. So now this says this is an enabled policy. And again, we can get lots of policies. We can get a little more precise if we want them. Let's do this. Let's come back over here. Let's say I want to take a look at my Control-Alt-Delete options. And in my Control-Alt-Delete options, I can change some options here. So let's say I don't want people to look at my task manager. So I can go to my task manager and say I want to remove it from my Control-Delete options. So I'm going to say enabled and then apply, and okay, so now I have a couple of policies enabled. All right. Let's go ahead and close our group policy editor for the moment because I want you to see how this works. So I'm going to go to my settings, and here in my settings, I might have to refresh this in order for this to take effect because it says I have no settings defined. So there, I refresh it, just the F5, and now I have some my user configuration is enabled, so is my computer configuration. I have some policies and some administrative templates, and you'll see here where things are set to hide or show. So I'm going to show my administrative templates, and it says in here I have two policies, one for system Control-Delete options. The policy is remove task manager, and that's enabled. And then I have system storage, removable storage, and I show that the policy is all removable storage classes deny access, and that policy is disabled as well. And if I had set comments, they would show up here. Okay, now I have created a group policy. I can link my policy now to make it take effect. Remember, if it doesn't take effect, then, or if I don't link it, then it doesn't take effect. So I'm going to come to my sales, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to link an existing GPO. And my existing GPO, I want to link my user restrictions here. And so that is now linked. Now let me show you one other thing. We talked about you can have multiple levels of organizational units, and anything you apply higher up is inherited down. I can also go to an OU, right click and block inheritance. Again, doing so sometimes gets a little bit hairy, shall we say? So we might not want to do that. The cleaner we can keep this, the better off we are. The more conflicts we have. So disabling inheritance and enforcing, overriding, and conflicting, the more that we have, the more complex it gets and the harder it is to troubleshoot group policies. So if we don't have to get complex, let's not get complex. Now remember, I linked this to my sales organizational unit. So if I close this, and our settings were block the task manager and block access to removable storage devices. So now let's come back to Active Directory users and computers. And in here, we're going to see we have sales, so Steve Hartman, marketing, Grant Harris, and Samantha Smith. So this policy right now is going to apply to Steve Hartman. He can't do those things. These two will be just fine because they're in a different OU, and that group policy is not applied there. Had I applied the policy to either one, or to both of them, rather, it would take effect. Or if I applied it once up here, it would take effect to everything underneath. Okay, so remember, when you're dealing with group policies, hunting and pecking for group policies, normally not very effective. Better option is Do a Google search, see if you can find it, especially if it's policies you don't work with a whole lot. Do a Google search, see if you can find it. Then create your policy, set the policy settings that you want, link it to an organizational unit, and it takes effect. Now remember, we do have a couple of things. Number one, group policies for users are applied at logon. They're also applied every so often after that. I think it's 15 minutes. Same thing with computers, are applied when the computer boots up, which means if you put in a policy, it won't take effect for the user right away. If you need it to take effect for the user right away, the user can go to, I'm going to open up Windows PowerShell admin, standard command prompt will do this, and we can run the command gp update. So group policy update will update our group policies for us. But what it does, just GP update, and you see updating policy, computer policy is updated successfully, user policy updated successfully. It only updates new GPO settings, right? So if we change the GPO setting, it wouldn't update it right away. So a lot of people just get in the habit of running the command GP update /force. And that forces everything to be updated, whether it is new or an existing policy that got changed or whatever. It forces a re-update of all policies. And so that's a great tool that you can use for troubleshooting. Now, when you have multiple policies, it can sometimes get a little entertaining to try to figure out what policy applies where and what policies are actually being applied to any particular user in any particular scenario. We're going to take a look at that in our next video.